Top shelf classic lager, brewed using only the finest noble hops and Canadian malt. This crisp and refreshing lager aims high and scores big. From Lake Bay's Brewing Company in partnership with the NHL Alumni Association. Available at the LCBO and the beer store.
You're listening to Life After the Game, brought to you by Gong Show Gear, the show that profiles former NHL players on their playing days and current lives after hockey. Here's your host, Darcy Lynch.
My guest today is Bret Hedican. Played over 1,000 NHL games with the Blues, Canucks, Panthers, Ducks, and won a Stanley Cup with Carolina in 2006. Welcome to the show, Bret.
Well, thanks, Darcy. Thanks for having me on.
You started out in St. Louis, and when you would have joined the Blues, that's right when Brett Hull would have been in his prime. What was he like as a teammate for a young rookie like yourself whenever you first made it to the NHL?
Well, you come with the guns right away, huh? Brett, yeah. Well, Brett Hull, unfortunately was probably not the best teammate. He was a guy that was real negative to young players, including me and others. But, I think away from the rink, and a lot of guys get along with him really well, and I know he's a great guy. But, unfortunately, when I played there, yeah, he was a tough guy, and then maybe just demanding. And unfortunately, I came from a college environment where every teammate loves each other. I mean, you're going to school together, and all you have to do is worry about going to school and playing hockey. And those are two really fun things. And then obviously all the other things that come along with college is a really, a great thing for your life. I mean, you go from living in your own home with your mom and dad, and then next thing you know, you're on your own. And I know a lot of kids in Canada play, junior hockey, and they have the opportunity to leave home early. But that was the first time that I had an opportunity to do that, and it was great to be able to just, go to school and play hockey and have fun along the way. And so, going to St. Louis was a different environment. It just didn't work out for me. Unfortunately, I think they had some veteran defensemen. I had a couple of great mentors there. Actually, Kurt Giles was a great friend of mine and still is a great friend today, and he really helped me along the way and took me under his wing. And I think that's the way I always looked at it after that. I think I knew that anywhere I ever went, and as I progressed through my career, I never was going to be a guy that was going to be negative to a teammate. And, it taught me a lot about what works and what doesn't. And, so those environments I try to take a little bit from every place I play.
Well, in your reference to playing the college hockey route, an American who grew up in Minnesota, what was it like then to find out in '94 that you were being traded to Vancouver, to a fishbowl Canadian market where the media scrutiny was going to be much different than anything you'd ever experienced before?
I was excited. I'm going to tell you, I couldn't wait. I mean, yes, I really regret the fact that it didn't work out in St. Louis, and I enjoyed my time there. But when I got to Vancouver, I was really excited about being in a hockey market, being someplace where people truly get the game of hockey, they understand the game of hockey, they breathe, they live it, and they expect a lot from you. And I thought that was going to be a great environment to try to learn in. And I think when I got up there and Pat Quinn, rest his soul, I really appreciated what he did with me and took me under his wing and basically just said, hey, Brett, we don't care if you're going to score another goal the rest of your career. We just really want you to play good, solid defense, and I'm going to help you do that. And when you feel that as a young player, a young 20-year-old and 22, 23-year-old, you feel like you're finally, okay, you're in the right spot. You got a guy, a coach that believes in you, that wants to mentor you and show you the ropes on how to play defense in the NHL. And so it was a great thing for me in my career.
This is Life After the Game, brought to you by Gong Show Gear. This week, my guest is former NHL defenseman Bret Hedican. And Bret, you were an important part of the Canucks back whenever Mark Messier signed as a free agent. And your team obviously struggled while Mess was in town, but his reputation is so legendary about how he can take command of a room and that his leadership qualities are uncomparable to most captains that have played in the league. But the fact that the team didn't have on-ice success, how much did Messier's presence change the room dynamic whenever he came to town for the 97-98 season?
Well, the team was going through change anyway. I mean, 94 was a run that when I played against the Canucks before I even got to the Canucks, when I played against them for the Blues, I mean, I remember saying to myself after I played them up in Vancouver, after I'd been elbowed in the jaw, I'd been worked over, I'd been run into so many times, and the compete level of the Vancouver Canucks that year was unbelievable. And so when I got traded there, And I could feel what that felt like in the locker room. I felt something unbelievably unique. And what it was camaraderie. It was teamwork. It was never pointing the finger at anybody for any mistake that you would make, which was a contrast from where I just had come from in St. Louis. So we had an environment that was unbelievable. And there's a reason why you go all the way to the Stanley Cup that year and lose to the Rangers in Game 7. It was because something that you have within that room, and it's trust, and it's accountability, and it's belief in one another. And I think because of that, I think I was always in search of. But what happened was that team got dismantled after that year, and it was a rebuilding time. And, towards the end there when Mark Messier came in, we were already kind of broken as a team, trying to put it back together, trying to find that chemistry and that trust and accountability within that room. And I could feel it kind of starting to come back. And unfortunately, there's a lot of talk of, Trevor Linden and Mark Messier and all this other stuff. But I truly respected Mark Messier. I thought he really mentored me as well. And I learned a lot from him and what it took to be a great leader. I took a lot of pieces from Mark and learned a lot from him. And I learned a lot from Trevor as well. So there's a lot of great things about that. And, I'm just going to take the positive from it.
Well, and it was from Vancouver then that you were traded to the Florida Panthers, and that was a part of a blockbuster deal, and you went along with Pavel Bure. Was that make the trade easier going along with your friend and teammate in Pavel? And what was the original reaction like to having a guy like the Russian Rocket coming into a market like Florida?
That was maybe the only trade in my career that really hurt when I got traded from Vancouver. And I say that because, not that I didn't want to go to Florida, but it was just like I had mentioned, I felt like the team was starting to come back in Vancouver. And when you go to the Stanley Cup Finals in '94, and then you have to start to rebuild, it takes time. It takes time to kind of get guys to kind of buy in and get, time for players to kind of come together. And I felt like we were just starting to get that when I got traded. I almost felt like they gave up on me. And that one kind of stung. It was like a punch in the gut when Mike Keenan pulled me aside in Dallas when we were down there to play the Dallas Stars. And it's a funny story when I got traded. But nevertheless, I ended up in Florida, and that was a growing experience as well. We had a great team down in Florida, and going with Pavel exactly was great to kind of go with him. And I think he was still playing at some of the top of his career, and just an amazing player to play with. I mean, I don't know if I can ever remember a player like Pavel Bure and the way he could explode and stick handle and make plays and do it at high end. It was just something that I can still visualize today, and just it puts a smile on my face knowing that, I played with that guy, and that was so fun to watch him play.
And Bret, you talked about your original reaction whenever you were traded from Vancouver to Florida. And then in 2002, you go on to the Hurricanes and you have a great run against Detroit in the Stanley Cup final that year. And the fact that you go on to win a Stanley Cup with that team 4 years later, what was your initial reaction like when you found out you were going to Carolina? And could you ever imagine that you were going to go on to have so much success in that market?
Well, initially, I'd say no. I mean, when I got traded to Carolina, and I have the utmost respect for Paul Maurice, another coach that I had along the way that really influenced my career. And he was another guy like Pat Quinn that really understood the assets that I could bring to a team, and knew that there were strengths that I had that he wanted to utilize, and he didn't want me to go outside my strengths. And when I got in that environment, I was there 1 week, and I felt exactly what I had felt in Vancouver in '94, and the team we had that went to the Stanley Cup Finals. And boy, I mean, if you talk about how you can kind of feel environments and what winning feels like inside, was I right? Well, it ended up being exactly like you had mentioned, Darcy, in the fact that it was David versus Goliath. It was $90 million in some in payroll in Detroit Red Wings against these. Who are these guys? The Carolina Hurricanes. These guys aren't supposed to be in this situation. And there was a reason why we were in that situation, because we were a bunch of dogs, and we worked harder off the ice than we did on the ice. And because we worked hard off the ice, it just carried over onto the ice. And that was just such a fun year because it was unexpected, but in some ways it wasn't unexpected in my mind. It was something that I could feel. I could see that accountability. I could see that trust inside that locker room and all the things that it takes to win. And sure enough, we go all the way to the end. And unfortunately, we lost that. But when I say 4 years later, winning, not a surprise, is because The reason why I re-signed there in Carolina after 2002 is because exactly that, is because I knew we had the core to win a Stanley Cup. And I knew we had the environment, the work ethic, and the accountability and the trust and all those things it takes to win. We had it right there. And I didn't need to go somewhere else. I didn't need to go find that somewhere else. I knew I had it there, and 4 years later we win with that same core, and we added some pieces to that puzzle, and off we went on one of the, the greatest years I've ever been a part of. And, to this day, it's just something that you'll never forget. I mean, yes, winning a Stanley Cup is special, but when you win it with a bunch of guys that you've done great things with, and you had a lot of fun together, and you have that trust, it's something that I'll always remember.
And Bret, you've certainly been involved in a very diverse number of things since your playing days ended. I want to start with your current broadcasting career, and you're covering the Sharks. How did you end up choosing California as home and broadcasting for a team that you never played for?
Well, my wife is from California, Northern California, and when I retired from Carolina at the time, and I actually played one more year in Anaheim, but from there, I knew I was going to live in Northern California and wanted to settle down up there. My kids wanted to get in school. I got 2 daughters, and so my wife Christy and I, we moved up there, and we did an interview at Comcast Sportsnet California. What are these 2 retired athletes doing today? And that's what Christy and my wife Christy Yamaguchi and I and went to the interview. And after a couple of days later, I got a call from Comcast that, hey, would you want to do pregame and postgame for the hockey San Jose Sharks here? I'm like, no, I want to retire. I don't want to think about hockey anymore. And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, it's what I know, and this is something that for every hockey player, when they retire is never easy, and so I ended up saying, yes, I'll try it. So I went down there and got in front of the camera and could, pull it off, I guess, if you will. And 5 years later, I was still doing it, and it kind of led into the radio job this year with Dan Ruzanowski. So it was just one step at a time. Never played for the Sharks. I've always, Doug Wilson tried to trade for me a couple of years and got a called Carolina and asked Jim Rutherford, and Jim came to me and said, hey, Bret, you want to go to San Jose? And ultimately I did, but the problem was it's hard to leave a team that you've won with before. And so it never really worked out with San Jose. But nonetheless, I feel like a Shark now, and I really am having a great time calling the games on the radio.
Well, and it keeps you active and involved in the game. And you mentioned about your wife, Christy Yamaguchi, of course, a former Olympian. And you also have a business called E360 Global. And I'd like you to speak to that, exactly what the business is. And I believe it has a strong affiliation with your wife's clothing line.
Yeah, well, it started off, after I retired, and she really wanted to do something for her foundation, Always Dream Foundation. And what it was we're always trying to, generate, revenues and so forth for the foundation to make a difference in kids' lives. And, we wanted to do something that we could, be like Tom Shoes or Paul Newman's Own, having a product with purpose. And we really set out on this path to do something that we could have fun along the way, build a business, but be able to give that portion of those proceeds back into the foundation where it could just kind of perpetuate itself. And I think that was one of the things that the licensing company E360 I formed to help her out to try to kick that and start that off the ground. And that's why I started the company. We found a company up in Montreal to manufacture clothing for Christy, and we set out on this path to produce an activewear line called Suya brand. It's spelled Tsuya brand.com. And Suya is Christy's middle name, and it was her grandmother's name, and it translates into shine. And so that's kind of where that whole path started off to. But it unfortunately, over the 2 seasons, it didn't work out with the Montreal group, and we took it in-house, and we started to manufacture our clothes on our own. And now we are designing, manufacturing, and selling our products wholesale, retail, online, and starting to kind of build up some momentum. It takes time, just like everything in life. Nothing comes easy, and we're stuck it out, and we're slowly starting to make a difference in the foundation as well. And the foundation is in 17 schools right now, helping with early childhood literacy. So we're really trying to make a difference on setting a kid off on the right path by giving him the tools to success, which is learning how to read.
This is Life After the Game, brought to you by Gong Show Gear. I'm Darcy Lynch. This week my guest is former NHL defenseman Bret Hedican. And another business that I remember reading a few months back, Bret, that you're involved with is RosterBot, rosterbot.com. Talk a little about that venture.
Yeah, rosterbot.com. I got started involved in that in the year 2000. I was up there for the Olympic Games in Vancouver and I played in kind of a charity hockey game with a bunch of technology geeks. And ultimately, deep down, I'm kind of a technology geek, and that's the reason why I went. A guy, Kawasaki, I don't know if you've heard of his name, but he was going to go. He invited me, and I ended up meeting a guy by the name of Ian Bell, who started the company Rosterbot originally. He was a guy that just a pickup goaltender that played 4 different leagues a week, and he was this technology guy who wanted to really, once he saw the plumbers and the guys on his team starting to have, phones that were smartphones that he could get emails, he knew it was a time to really start to try to make something that could organize hockey. And he really didn't have time to work on it from 2000, and he asked me if I wanted to get involved. And that's when I kind of said, sure, I'll get involved. And I wanted to get involved in technology and finding a way to kind of get into the taste of that appetite that I really wanted to kind of grasp. And when you look at that situation, I rebuilt the back end and hired a programmer to help me do that. I built an iPhone app, and off we were running and really trying to get it to grow. And now we're growing. Man, it's so fun to watch and see what we're doing these days, and really taking the work on play and helping people that really, don't want to have to worry about organizing their team anymore. They can use Rosterbot and let coaches do what they do best, which is, have fun, teach the game, teach the qualities of life that really help in giving the kids the tools of life that help them propel themselves in life. So it's really fun to be involved in Rosterbot.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's certainly a very diverse number of things, Bret, that you're working in since your NHL playing days ended. And I'm sure that you really appreciate that balance, as there's a lot of players on this show that talk about needing to be connected to the game still whenever they first retire. And then there's others who have went in a completely different direction and have strictly just stayed in maybe the business world or something away from hockey. But you seem to have a good balance of both, that you have your business affiliations with something like E360 Global or Rosterbot, and you're also very connected to the game through broadcasting. That I'm sure you're happy to have the best of both worlds, so to speak.
Well, you're dang right, but I'll tell you, I'm very fortunate. I'm very happy to be that, to have these things in my life. But I will say it's busy, and my main thing is trying to focus on my girls, my 2 daughters, and I try to fit all this other stuff that keeps me busy and keeps me focused on trying to, be like an athlete in some ways. You're always going to be driven. I think that's something that you can never take away from yourself. So it's trying to find that balance of obviously having your life, giving it stability with your kids and your family, but then yet drive a little bit of that other stuff through your competitiveness into business and some other things in your life. So I appreciate you saying that. Thanks, Darcy.
And one last quick question before we sign off, Bret, that I'm going to go back to your playing days for this one. I mentioned that Gong Show Gear is the sponsor of this show, and given that the name Gong Show can be used at times to describe some of the biggest characters that play in the league, or some of the guys that, whether it's just the crazy antics or just the most hilarious in a dressing room. But thinking back, you had a very long NHL career, over 1,000 games. You played for 5 different franchises. You've developed a lot of friendships through those years, but is there one particular teammate that stands out to you that just still makes you chuckle these days when you think back to the playing days so much that you could probably classify them as a Gong Show?
Well, there's too many to try to recognize. Well, a guy I saw last night, here in Minneapolis for the game, calling Inside the Glass with Gord Miller, and up in the stands was a guy by the name of Ray Whitney. He was a lot of fun when I had him in Carolina. We played together in Florida, and I got to know him better in Carolina. But I'll never forget, his dad was an RCMP cop, and one of the guys that cut his laces, like guys like to do, and to get these players back that cut his laces to make him late for practice, he got from his dad that little blue dust that they put on, things, and when kids are stealing something, and when they steal it, this blue dust gets on their hands. Next thing you know, they can't get the blue paint, if you will, once it gets condensation or it hits the moisture of the body and the water on their hands or whatever, and it turns that person into blue hands, and then now you know who was stealing the goods. Well, Ray Whitney went into and put that dust on the players that he thought cut his laces on their gear, their undergarment gear. So when they put their stuff on to go out for practice, they didn't know this dust was in their gear. And while they go out and practice, they come back off. They take all their underwear off, and they all look like a bunch of Smurfs. So that's the stuff that those are the things that a guy like, only Ray Whitney would think of. And when you think of characters, I mean, he's one of the first guys that comes to mind.
Well, with Ray recently retiring from the NHL, hopefully he has as seamless a transition into post-playing days as you have, Bret, as it's been a pleasure hearing about your current role in broadcasting with the Sharks, but also about your businesses, rosterbot.com and E360 Global. Hopefully we touch base again down the road.
Thanks, Darcy. Thanks for the chat.
You've been listening to Life After the Game, brought to you by Gong Show Gear, the premier manufacturer of lifestyle hockey apparel. Check them out at gongshowgear.com. Thanks to this week's guest, Bret Hedican. I'm Darcy Lynch. You can follow the show on Twitter at Darcy P. Lynch.
Top Shelf Classic Lager, brewed using only the finest noble hops and Canadian malt. This crisp and refreshing lager aims high and scores big. From Lake-based Brewing Company in partnership with the NHL Alumni Association. Available at the LCBO and the beer store.